Welcome back. You're watching Morning Express. Now, on our question of the day, we were asking you, is the dialogue the solution to the current political stalemate in the country? Is dialogue the solution to the current political stalemate in the country? And let me just sample a few of your responses. Royd Adrian says, there is no way you can say you don't approve my election as president and you expect we to dialogue. What are we dialoguing about? Can you move on to more important matters? That is Raymond Kimathi. And David Kariuki says, which stalemate are you talking about? You should be talking about threats from one side. And Carlos Boyd says, Kenya has to move forward. Citizens are tired of this politicking. This is just some of your response that we're getting from Twitter. You can always tweet me directly at Ashley Mazuri or at KTN News. The hashtag to use is Morning Express. Now, we want to continue with our conversation. But before that, we would like to listen in to some of the comments from NASA leaders.
As far as we are concerned as NASA, there were no elections on 26th of October. We still want to have elections. But that notwithstanding, any elections in the same circumstances are likely to yield the same convoluted results.
I think I've not had anyone who wants to join the government of Uhuru and Ruto. If anyone wants to join, then as an individual. That is not position of NASA. NASA's position is we want to discuss things that would progress this country. The government we are talking about, the system of government, is whether we are going parliamentary or we are remaining presidential or we are adopting hybrid system.
All right, I'll start with you, Dilano. What are your comments to that? Parliamentary, High Court or presidential?
I think at the end of the day, you know, from that particular little portion, there's a lot of wordplay in terms of what is being said and what is not being said. There's no person who does not want to be on the winning team. It is human nature. All of us want to be on the winning team. So I agreed there has to be some form of dialogue. It has to happen. As my colleagues have said over there, it's a responsibility of the president to be president over all Kenyans and over all aspects of our society. And that means being able to communicate very openly and effectively with any person from any walk of life in this country.
Yes.
So in terms of those comments, I think those comments are said very cautiously. I think if you look at the body language, the approach to those particular comments is very, very optimistically cautious that there is a hope that something can be pursued, and then the options are then given, you know, presidential, parliamentary, or hybrid. And now, in terms of that, that is what you'd call is, I think here we're seeing the opposition saying, we are giving you an opportunity to find a forum or a methodology to talk with us. So what is needed here is just simply pure leadership. That's all. That's all. It's just pure leadership.
All right. Daktari, one of the people that just tweeted said, you want dialogue, yet you don't recognize me as a president. What are we dialoguing about? I want you to comment on that.
Recognition is a very complex idea.
Yeah.
There's the question of legal legitimacy that nobody's questioning. Then there's the question of political legitimacy that is up for discussion. So I think the gentleman needs to appreciate that, you know, people are not talking purely about law here, and I'm an advocate, so I know the limits of law. But importantly, I think that we need to move beyond, you know, the basic debates about systems of government. Because if I speak in a totally ideal sense, it's clear to me that presidential system of government is not conducive for Kenya, including the simple fact that our voting patterns are entirely ethnic, and to that extent you exclude well over 30-something ethnic groups from having their son possibly becoming president or prime minister of Kenya. The title is irrelevant. It's more about the system. And in South Africa they have president, but it's entirely parliamentary. So that system that totally excludes a section of the population cannot remotely be said to be engendering some element of national unity. Importantly, we need to put it in context of Kenya. We went through an election system, an election process which clearly was very expensive. Just imagine 12 billion to elect one office.
Yes.
Just because of Iran. when it's possible that if we had strong parties, then, you know, if we are done with one gentleman, we can always go for the next lady or the next man. So probably we are talking about working around, looking at the costs, looking at the emotions that go into these things, and perhaps also enhancing transparency, because, you know, it's less possible to rig elections at constituency levels than at national levels, because all our discussions seem to be that, look, tallying at national level doesn't seem to go right. Yeah. So maybe we need to also think about doing away with this national tallying, and we focus on electing people at constituency level, and then their party constitutes the government. Okay. And finally, as an advocate, I'm worried for the Supreme Court. We have basically 6 men and women who every 5 years are exposed to deciding a case that clearly they are not able to conclusively decide. And in the process, you are making just one institution that ordinarily is supposed to be, you know, the pillar of a constitutional interpretation, to decide a very, very complex political matter. And in the process, what you end up seeing, because you know, when you read all their judgments, you don't see a lot of philosophy in it. What you end up seeing is a lot of unnecessary ethnicization of the Supreme Court. So if you take all these things together and you take our experience in 2013 and 2017, then there's obviously need for structured dialogue around which system we are going to have. And in my case, it shouldn't be presidential. Okay. Remember, and that's my final comment. Yes. Remember, the only reason why we have presidential system and why we can't reform it very fast is because we have around 5 or so gentlemen who have ambitions of becoming president, and particularly the power that comes with it, you know, all these levels of control and all that. All right. So the next question, maybe this will call for a revolution of some sort, is whether the 5 gentlemen, and we do have a lot of respect for them, are worth the 12 billion, the 70 billion we spend on elections.
I would like to pick it up from there. You talked about election costing 12 billion just for one seat. And Steve, I'll come to you. We just had Wetangula saying they want fresh elections. As a country, can we afford it?
It's not about affording it. Yeah. Just the limited answer to that is that there will be no election until 2022. I think how that is explained to different constituencies now, that is for the political spin masters to do. But the reform discussion, whether it's presidential, parliamentary, hybrid, whether it is the institutionalization of political parties, because parties are now constitutional organs, and they need to be effectively regulated and also well-funded by the exchequer. Those are conversations that we must open up. Whether we want to stagger elections, other places stagger elections, having 6 elections with endless lists, very long lists of candidates, confusing voters. Those are the issues we need to discuss going forward within when there's still time, between now and the next election. What we need to appreciate now is this, as a country. We have what the Constitution has settled with finality. Yes. That we must appreciate and just move away from that. One of those issues that have been settled with finality, sadly for NAS supporters, is that the election is now over, truly over. Now, but that does not mean that electoral law-related issues have been... In fact, the closure of the election only opens another phase for interrogation of all the reform processes that need to be done, including what Dr. Komolo is saying. Do we even need to expand the Supreme Court to make them 11 judges? You know, and not just including even Article 138.10 that gives IBC, the chairman of the commission, the only person who can declare presidential election result. Parliament tried to innovate outside that, and that was unlawful and unconstitutional, because so far as the Constitution still says the chairman to declare the president-elect. No, there are many issues. I think that we're going forward, this is the point. Let Kenyans have a conversation on what we need. Okay. What is lacking for now is a matching culture. Even the political elite among themselves, they must agree to have some minimum level of decency, because that is lacking. On the issue of representation, the Constitution has done everything. Talk about inclusiveness, we have done it. Now we have women represented, we have persons with disabilities, marginalized groups, you know, and communities being represented. That is the kind of inclusiveness the Constitution talks about. When politicians lead the discussion, the danger with that is that you don't know what is informing their philosophy. It could be that it's as well as struggle for co-option into the club of resource managers. Yes. You get? Not necessarily what works for us. For me, the underlying problem is that we still vote ethnically. We still vote based on what you think your person will do for you. Now, if you move it to parliamentary system, by way of example, the Jubilee can still dominate and will still be excluded. You move hybrid, every system can still be dominated by one faction or another. How then do we have a conversation that moves Kenya gradually as part of a gradual, consistent investment to make Kenyans vote based on ideas and ideologies, not just on the person that they share a similar ethnic extraction with?
Yes.
For me, if we get that, we will be moving in the right direction.
Dr. Harry, you look like you want to comment on that.
Yes, I've listened to this good debate about ideologies and ideas. And it assumes that, you know, in every society, people vote purely based on, you know, whether capitalism or, you know, conservative or liberal. This is just not a fact. There are other persuasions that make people vote, including regions where they come from, historical concerns of that region. So ethnicity in Kenya is not a bad thing. There are many reasons why people in Central will vote for one of their own, including just the fact that this guy is a homeboy.
Yes.
That does not mean they are tribal. It simply means that in the way we are ordered here, it seems like, you know, language has become a form of identity. So we need to move from, you know, the debate that there will be one day when Kenya will be ideologically driven, you know, we vote on this and that, and move to real issues, whether whatever we have works for us. And the question of parliamentary system, which I'm passionate about at a more scholarly level, is one of the ways to address a multi-ethnic society to the extent that it equalizes people at constituency level and then gives parties room to at least form coalitions. Remember, Germany is still struggling 3-4 months later to form a coalition government. And for the past 15 years or so, the main parties have been, you know, agreeing on agenda and are in government at the same time. So this is something that probably could work for Kenya. And, you know, finally, when you talk about exclusion, the good thing about parliamentary system is that even the opposition have a room to be within the formal system of government in terms of being in parliament and therefore become more effective. So that's where we need to go, as opposed to believing that, you know, for some reason lawyers will stop voting for one of their own. It will not happen.
All right, Dilana, do you share the same sentiments?
I think we need to really move forward because when we compare a democracy like Germany, which is Europe's strongest economy, and the way that their politics is playing out, and we look at Kenya, which has a very, very small GDP, and when we look at our debt to GDP ratio, when we look at other dynamic factors, I think the politics problem, if I mention something that you know, my colleague over here was talking about, is really about people right now. The mood or some of the agitation appears to be like people are looking for the ability to resource manage. And we need to get away from this management discussion. And there's a leadership versus management thing that is going on over here. And I think really Kenya needs to move to leadership, not to management. I think even from a resource perspective, we should not be looking at, say, cabinet secretaries being appointed to be resource managers because they have the academic qualifications to do that. Because you will find that that person perhaps was a very good manager but a horrible leader, and you'll find that in 5 years Kenyans have nothing to show for actually having that particular cabinet secretary in place. We also need to look at another aspect. The other aspect is Kenya as a whole. We do not have currently a swiftly growing economy. We have an economy that is at best compressed. We have lack of good utilization of our natural resources. We have that industrialization bit that has not been really tweaked out. So we have so many other issues apart from the politics and apart from feeling that I have my guy in place. If we have my guy in place, look, what is my guy's plan to actually make sure that that lady in Potsio who has not been able to sell her fish is able to find an open market across somewhere else in Uganda, which is not too far away, which is profitable to her and her family. We have to move to the leadership matters. And we have to begin to talk about things that are not just factored or centralized around politics and issues which are factored and centralized around government institutions, parliament, the judiciary, and governance from the center. Devolution came in so that actually every single region, 47 regions, would have their own autonomy. Devolution hasn't worked beautifully simply because of one factor. The governors and the county governments simply do not have the resources. And they don't have the resources because if you look at Kenya, most of our budget is spent on just recurrent expenditure. We have very little for development.
Yeah.
And even then when we have money for development, we look at it on a 12-year term. In Asia, these guys plan 100 years ahead. You know, so where is it? And we have Vision 2030, but
yes.
Vision 2030 at best doesn't even have the resources to have the Vision 2030. We should have been talking about a Vision 2030 that has factored, it's got 5 trillion that has been locked into it to drive it out. So in terms of just the subjective matters of talking the politics, we actually have to say, okay guys, it's been a nice discussion.
Yes.
We've called the clan meeting and the discussions, but now we need to roll up our sleeves, get out, farm, and get food for our families.
All right, all right. We would like to release our KTN home viewers. Thank you very much for watching Morning Express. See you tomorrow, same place, same time. All right, you talked about cabinet secretaries, and of course, there has been a clash over cabinet secretaries. Allow me to read this quote. Now, National Assembly Majority Leader Aden Duale says cabinet secretaries who have been given new duties in the president's second term do not have to be subjected to scrutiny by MPs before they're sworn in. While this other side, Minority Leader John Mbadi says although NASA does not recognize President Uhuru's legitimacy, the law requires that all cabinet secretaries be vetted by the National Assembly before they can assume office. Steve, your comments on that?
I think Duale should not mislead Kenyans.
Okay.
And the AG should not misadvise the president.
Okay.
All cabinet secretaries must be vetted. In fact, not just CSs, even the Attorney General. You know, Professor Githu Muigai has never been vetted since he was appointed by Kibaki.
Okay.
He was inherited by Uhuru Kenyatta. Then Uhuru Kenyatta succeeded him in office. Then now it looks like he's going to be succeeded quietly. The law, he forms part of the cabinet. All cabinet appointments must, yes, the Attorney General is part of the cabinet.
Okay.
All cabinet secretaries, including the Attorney General, must be vetted if he's going to be appointed. If he's going to be appointed to that position again. So to tell Kenyans that the other cabinet secretaries who were appointed in 2013 and are not likely to succeed themselves will not be vetted, I think that would be to innovate outside the law in a manner that offends the law. All of them should be vetted, I think, but my main concern is this. If it depended on the president, this depends on him. There are basic minimum compliance issues. I'd like to see the finalization of the cabinet list reflecting what the High Court has said. There was confusion as to the law on composition of cabinet secretaries. The High Court, which in terms of interpretation of the law, the hierarchical order is the final organ that can interpret the law definitively, already said that any subsequent reorganization, reappointment of the cabinet must meet the two-third gender principle.
All right.
Let the president be cautious, to be careful to observe that, to avoid unnecessary litigation, people going back to the High Court seeking to, citing the government, the AG for contempt of court, and just putting the government in an embarrassing position. Those are the hints that the opposition will take. You see, even the opposition, they know what they're doing. They're innovating outside the law. Yeah. Citing, they're manipulating clear constitutional provisions and then using them in a manner that clearly falls outside the law. But if the government is also doing the same, then you say you can't demand from someone that which yourself cannot give if it depended on you. The government must ensure that there's minimum compliance with the law on areas that are very clear.
All right.
Ensure that there's strict adherence to human rights standards, because that's a problem for the last term. This term, Uhuru Kenyatta must respect human rights. He must ensure that there's more public participation in governance processes. I think if he does that, plus the 4 pillars that he speaks about, Kenyans will support him in all that he wants to do. Okay, so Dr. briefly, as we conclude, so how then can we move on as Kenyans?
Well, first on vetting, I haven't perused the specific provisions of the law, so I don't want to mislead your audience that there should be another vetting or not. But what I think is the bigger picture is the reason why people become cabinet secretaries. Part of the bigger picture is to outline your role, to ensure that you are integrity, so you have complied with the formal provisions of the law, and that involves some level of vetting, and also to outline your vision for the ministry, particularly those to be reassigned. So if you look at it from that broader objective, then I think there's need to engage with a public institution that will at least expose them, question them, and that seems to be Parliament.
All right.
On the question of national unity, I hate talking about abstract questions that, you know, historical injustices have been perpetrated, all these things, because these have been repeated for far too long. There's obvious need to engage on questions to do with electoral justice. What the opposition is saying, and I'm not their spokesperson, it seems to me to be a civil disobedience geared towards addressing questions of electoral justice. So there is need to move forward, yes, move ahead with some element of dialogue and unity, but that dialogue needs to be, as far as possible, restricted to the questions to the issues that led us to where we are. To my mind, these are things to do with the system of government. Okay. 2 things to do with the role of the police in management of public affairs and in particular electoral systems. And 3, the role of IEBC in the context of state capture, where there appears to be an element of IEBC that is totally beholden to the executive. Are they really a neutral arbiter or not? And then how can we make all these institutions and all these issues work for us better in subsequent elections? Okay. Finally, unlike Steve, I don't believe that elections are done and dusted. There will be no elections until 2022. Okay. The fact of the matter is that you look at comparative experiences elsewhere, where the opposition, and I can cite well over 10, where the opposition is significantly organized, where they have a cause that they can rally their supporters, and where that cause can be used to destabilize government, one of the solution has been to negotiate with the government, or actually to bring it down, and then we have fresh elections. So this can happen. It is entirely dependent on how the opposition is organized. It's entirely dependent on how they gather support. This is what many people call revolution. Okay. But it's obvious that triggering a revolution is not easy. It's not as simple as organizing a swearing-in ceremony.
All right, yeah. Dilano, final remarks. How do we move on as Kenyans?
I think as Kenyans now we need to say, you know, what's done is done. It's in history, it's in the past. We need to move forward. Okay. I do not agree with the position where we start trying to formulate or foment any form of revolution. It's not going to help us. It's not going to help our children. It's not going to help the development of this nation. I can adequately say that the future for us looks very bright. I do believe that by 2022, we will not even be having or talking about the same type of elections or voting system. Our hope is that electoral justice, that reforms in various types are going to help this country. But I do believe that the main reason why a lot of these guys and a lot of the politicians decided, I want to take a job, is because they felt that they were going to access power, access influence, and access resources. Okay. Now, the private sector in Kenya needs to be unleashed. The private sector in Kenya has been on a leash since May last year. Okay. We need to unleash our private sector. We need to attract foreign direct investment. We need to pull on very many resources. The comment that you just made where it brings Aden Duale and John Mbadi into confrontation on a simple matter, in my understanding, which is the vetting of the cabinet secretaries. Yeah. Look, if you're going to take a job that is a responsibility for the entire nation, get vetted. And let's be very clear that you're a leader, you're not a manager. We've had many of these types of vettings previously. Historically, I think even the vetting process needs to change so that we can have the right people in place. But moving forward, by 2022, we should have not a developing nation, we should have a developed nation that is actually a resource center to the whole world, and we need to come out of Kenyan politics. I think Kenya has been too in-focused. We now need to start looking outwards and seeing how do we grow our nation, how do we employ our people, how do we feed our populace. Yes. And of course, that will mean very strong and very clear leadership. My parting point is, it's 2018, guys. It's not 2017. Let us move on as a nation. All
right, Steve, briefly, final comments.
Well,
Thank you very much, gentlemen. To my immediate left, Dilano Kilu. And then next to him, Dr. Eric Komolo and Steve Ogolla. Thank you very much for joining us here on Morning Express. Always a pleasure. We want to take a short break here, but when we come back, Your Money continues.